Hey guys, welcome back to a new video. In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how you can combine a Next.js front end with React with an Express.js backend. So this tutorial is just going to show you how you can create a Next.js project and link it with a Node.js backend. And previously on my channel, I've made videos where I've shown you how to do this with Flask and Python. And before that, I've shown you how to do it with just plain React and Node.js along with plain React and Python. And since this was a video that has been requested by a lot of people, I figured that this would be a way to show you guys how to do that. So to get started, I have my terminal opened inside of this directory called Next.js Express, and I'm just going to go ahead and get right into it. So first of all, I'm going to create a server directory by doing mkdir server to create a server directory. And then I'm going to create our client application, and this is just going to be a Next.js app. So to create a Next.js app, you're just going to do npx create next app. And before I hit this, I'm just going to show you what I have in my directory currently, and all I have is the server directory that I just created. So to create the Next.js client side, or the front end, we're just going to do npx create next app, and I'm just going to call it client because that's really all that we need. We're just creating a plain Next.js front end with the project name being client. So I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to have some configuration options for us, which I will walk you through. So it's going to ask you if you want to use TypeScript, and I'm just going to go ahead and click yes, ESLint, yes, Tailwind CSS, yes, source directory, no, app router, I'm going to go ahead and click no, even though it says recommended, because a lot of Next.js projects are still utilizing the previous pages router. And I think that the pages router is a lot easier to follow along with. So I'm just going to go ahead and click no with this one. And customize the default import alias, I'm just going to click no because this is not really required for this video. But if you guys would like to do that, you can. You just need to have your imports listed differently. So I'll go ahead and give it a few seconds, and it's going to create our front end for our project. And while it does this, I'm going to go ahead and open up a new terminal tab. And here we have our server directory as well. And inside of our server directory, I'm going to go ahead and cd into it, and we're going to do npm init, and this will allow us to create a package.json file. So the package name, we're just going to leave it as server, version 1, description, we can leave it blank, entry point, I'm just going to you can leave it as index.js, but I prefer to do server.js, so I'll just hit that. Test command, we don't need any at the moment. Git repository, this is optional. Keywords optional. Author, I'll just put my name. License, I'll leave it as the default, which is ISC. And it's going to ask, is this okay? For my preferences, yes, so I'll just hit enter. And now we have a package.json inside of our server directory. And we also have our Next.js front end created under the name client. So what I'm going to do next is open this up inside of VS Code. And here, I'm just going to go ahead and make my size a bit larger so that you guys can see. And now what we're going to do is go ahead and move on with installing dependencies for our backend to set it up. And then we're going to go ahead and proceed with connecting our client and our server. So to proceed with our server setup, what we need to do is I'm going to open up my terminal here, and I'm just going to go ahead and cd into my server directory. And inside of here, if we go to our package.json file, we specified that the main entry point for our server was going to be at a file called server.js. Now, for you, it might be different depending on what you chose. By default, it would have been index.js, but I just prefer using the name server.js. So what we need to do is first create this file right here. So whatever your file name is over here, you're going to do touch server.js. Now, touch is a Mac and Linux command, so if you're on Windows, then you can just go ahead and use the command for Windows to create a file, or you can just create a file like this. But I'm just going to do touch server.js to create a server.js file inside my server directory. And next, we're going to need to install Express. So to install Express, we're just going to do npm I express. And if you give it a few seconds, it's going to install Express. And after that, you should have a node modules directory along with package lock.json. After this, we're going to need to install NodeMon so that we can run our server in development mode. And the reason that we're going to be needing NodeMon is so that while we're in development mode, if we encounter any errors with our server while setting it up, we'll automatically have those errors displayed to us and won't need to restart our entire application. So I'm just going to do npm I nodemon. I'll do --save -dev to make sure that this is saved as a dev dependency. All right, and next we're going to need to go into our scripts and we're going to create 2 new scripts. And if you're not familiar with Node, you need to create a start script which will start up your server. So if we are in a production environment, we'd be running this start script, and to run our server as if we were in a production environment, we would just do node server. However, in this video, since we are developing it, we're going to be using NodeMon, which is why we installed it, because currently we are in a development environment. So we're just going to do dev and then NodeMon server. And you'll understand what these mean when I go ahead and actually use these scripts to start our server. But now that we have our server configuration and dependencies complete, we just need to go ahead and build our backend API. So to begin creating our backend API, I'm going to need to first import Express. So I'm going to do that with const express equal to require express. And then we're going to need to create an app instance. So we're going to do that with const app is equal to require or express. We're just going to call express to create the app instance. And then for our port, I'm just going to do const port is equal to 8080. Now, if you guys would like to have a separate port, you can do that as well. But just to keep things simple, I'm just going to go ahead with 8080 because that's what I've done in my previous videos as well. Next, we're going to need to create our actual API route where we're going to be fetching the data from. So I'm going to do app.get /API/home. We're going to take in a request and response. And here I'll just do res.json message hello world. And if you've seen my Python video, this is the same message that we did in that video as well. So I'm just going to keep things the same from that video. So now we've set up our API route. Now we're just going to need a way to run our application. So to run our application, we can just do app.listen, and we're going to be listening at port 8080, which we've specified right here. And once everything has begun, we're just going to do console.log server started on port, and then pass in our port. And now to run our server, I'm going to clear my terminal here so you guys can see. If we do npm start, this is going to call node server here. And what this will do is if we make any changes to our server file, we would have to restart our server by doing Control-C and then restarting it. And that would be a very big hassle to do. So that is why we have NodeMon installed. And for the purpose of this video, we're going to do npm run dev so that it will call NodeMon server. And this will basically allow us to make any changes into our script, but it will also restart the server automatically instead of having us do it manually. So if you do npm run dev, it'll say server started on port 8080. So if we go to localhost at port 8080, it's going to give us cannot get / and that's because we haven't created an API for this endpoint right here, this / endpoint. So what we need to do is go to /API /home because that's the only endpoint that we have currently. And I'm just going to paste that route in. And if we go here, you can see that the message that is returned by this route is hello world. So currently we have our backend API set up, and now we just need to go ahead and create our front end and make it fetch this message right here. And then later on, I'm going to show you how you can fetch other things as well. So now to proceed with our client, I'm just going to open up a new terminal and I'm going to cd into my client directory. And inside of here, I'm just going to do npm run dev, which is also a script here to to run our client in Next.js's development mode. And if we go to localhost at port 3000, and if you give it a few seconds to load, you'll see the boilerplate Next.js front end here. Now, what I'm going to do is remove all of this and just have it display a plain white screen so that we can have a lot more freedom when it comes to displaying this message from the backend API. So I'm going to go into the pages directory, and for this video we're not going to be doing anything with this API directory, so you don't have to worry about that. This app.tsx will just return the app. This document is just for the HTML document to be rendered onto the DOM, and index.tsx is the file that we're going to be writing our code inside of. So I'm just going to do Command A and then remove all of this code here. And what I'm going to do next is rfce, and this will create a function component in React. And if you want to know how I did that, if you go into your extensions and look up ES7 and look at the ES7 plus React Redux React Native snippets, you can install this so that you can get the snippet to create the functional component like I did there. So here what I'm going to do is save the code, and if we go back you can see that we have a black screen with index written in white. Now I prefer to have a white screen just because I think it looks a lot cleaner. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my styles, and inside of globals.css I'm just going to remove all the code that is below the Tailwind configuration. So I'm just going to go ahead and save this, and now you can see that we have just index written on here. And next what we're going to be doing is fetching this message from the backend and displaying it onto our front end right here. So to begin fetching from our backend, we also need to install CORS in our backend and set that up so that we don't encounter any cross-origin issues. So to do that, I'm going to go into my server.js file, and there is another dependency that we need to install. So if we go back into our server directory and do npm I CORS, this will basically install the CORS dependency, which will allow us to receive API calls to our backend. So once you've installed CORS by doing npm I CORS, you're just going to want to import it, and by doing const CORS is equal to require CORS. All right. And once you do this, you can just do app.use CORS, use this middleware function to make it so that our app can accept requests from our front end. So next, I'm going to go ahead into our index.tsx file, and here I'm going to import useEffect and useState. Now I have videos on both useEffect and useState, so if you don't know how these work, I recommend checking my videos on them, which I'll link in the top right hand corner of the screen. And we're going to be using useEffect so that we can run a side effect in our front end, so that on the initial load of the page, we are able to make an API call to our backend so that we can display whatever response is sent by the backend, which in this case is this message, to our DOM. And useState we're going to be using so that if we ever have any sort of data that we are retrieving in an array format, which I will show you later, we're going to be using it to store it and also to display the users by using for each loop. So I'm going to go ahead and just fetch our API by using useEffect. So to do this, I'm just going to do useEffect and then do fetch. And if you don't know how to fetch APIs in React or don't understand it, I also have a video on that, which I recommend you guys do check out if you're unfamiliar with the topic. And we're going to be fetching the URL right here, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, and what this will do is let our front end know that we're going to be fetching data from this URL in the backend. So once we fetched it, we're going to get the response and put that response into JSON, and then whatever data is in the JSON, we're just going to console.log to the console. And I'm going to pass in an empty array at the end of this useEffect so that this request only runs once and does not run multiple times. So I'll go ahead and refresh my front end, and if I do right click, inspect, and go to our console, you can see that we have an object. And this object basically contains the message, hello world. Now, our goal is to display this onto the DOM. So how do we do that exactly? So here I'm going to create a variable with useState. And I'm going to do const message set message. And by default, it's going to be set to loading. And the reason that it's going to be set to loading by default is that while the API is being fetched, that means that the data is currently loading. So I'm just going to display that message onto our DOM. And right now, it's going to be set to loading because we are doing nothing to change the state of this message variable. And what we are going to do is change the state of this variable once the data has been fetched. So we're just going to do set message to data.message. And what this will do, or response.data.message, whoops, or actually just do data.message. And what this will do is basically take the message object from the backend, this right here, and set the value of our message variable to data.message. So if you go back and look, you can see that we have displayed hello world, and this is specifically coming from the backend. So if we refresh our page, you can see that for a split second it displays loading. And the reason that it displays loading is because the API was still being fetched. And once it was fetched, we not only log the data to the console, but also set the message that is sent in that data to this message state variable, and are just displaying that variable with this one line right here. Now, I'll show you how this can be changed dynamically. Now, if I go here and do like this video, you can see that if I refresh the page, it's going to change to like this video because the message in the backend has also changed, and the app is making a API call to the backend each time that it loads, which is why you get like this video displayed onto the DOM. Now next I'm going to show you how to fetch an array from the backend, or just display the contents of an array in order. So to do this, I'm just going to go into my server, and here I'm going to make a new key. I'm going to call this people. And people is going to be an array consisting of Harry, Jack, and Barry. If you'd like to have more creative names, drop them in the comments. So if we go back to our backend here and refresh it, we can see that we have a new key consisting of Harry, Jack, and Barry assigned to the people key. Now, if we go into our front end and refresh, we get the array as well. And our goal is now to display Harry, Jack, and Barry below like this video. So to do this, all we're going to do is, again, go to our index file and just create a new state variable, and do const people set people, and set it to useState of an empty array, because while the data is being fetched, this array is going to be empty. Next, we're just going to do set people to data.people. And what this will do is basically, by default, our people array is set to that. And once fetched, it's going to be set to Harry, Jack, and Barry. Okay? Or Harry, Barry, and Jack, however the order was. So next, we just need to display these names onto the screen. So to do that, I'm going to first create a new div tag. I'm going to move this message inside this parent div. And to display them, we can just do people.map. We're going to take in, I guess, person, and then the index, and we'll just do a div, like so, and the key is going to be set to the index, and we'll just have person here. If we go ahead and refresh our page, you can see that we get Harry, Jack, and Barry from our backend. And you can also see that they are being fetched because the console log statement is also displaying them, and we can also get rid of this console.log since the code is working. And if I were to change the name, so let's say instead of Harry I put in my own name and refresh the page, you can see that my name is popping up. And so whatever data that we pass into our backend, that's the same data that's going to be retrieved by our front end and displayed, and we won't really have to do anything aside from calling the API and creating these state variables to display or to keep track of the data that we have to display onto the DOM. So that's basically how you can connect your Node backend server with your front end in Next.js, which is utilizing React, and fetch the backend API to display contents to the front end. So that basically concludes this video. And just to recap over what we did, we first created our client and server directories and set up our projects inside them, and then we installed our necessary dependencies to create an Express server for our backend, and then we created a backend endpoint that would return specific data that our front end would then retrieve using the fetch API, which was stored inside of a use effect, which would allow our front end to get the data from our backend on the initial page load and only do it once with this empty array over here. And then we're simply getting the data, storing that data in these state variables, and then using those state variables to display the data onto our screen. So that's basically it. And if you were confused about what this index does, if we go into our server, the index of this first element is 0, 1, and 2. So first element is 0, second is 1, third is 2. And what this index does is simply store that index as a key. So yeah, and that's basically how we created our Next.js and Node.js project. So I hope this video was helpful, and I hope that I was able to clear up any sort of confusion that you may have with setting up a project with not only a Next.js server but also a Node.js server. And if this helped, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll try to reply to you when I have the time. But yeah, I hope this video was helpful to you, and if it was, make sure to stay tuned for new uploads. And as always, have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next one.